Hello and welcome to the ITPro Podcast. I'm Adam Shepherd.
And I'm Jane McCallion.
And today we're talking about virtual reality. Virtual reality has come on in leaps and bounds over the last several years, and we've gone from the bulky, multi-wired monstrosity that was the first generation Oculus Rift to sleek portable headsets like the HTC Vive Focus Plus.
Despite all the technical progress, however, VR has struggled to achieve mainstream appeal, and it's still seen as the province of gamers and hardcore tech enthusiasts. In this week's episode, we're asking, is virtual reality technology ever going to reach the masses, or is it doomed to forever be a niche curiosity? So let's talk about the progress of VR over the last 5 years, Adam. I mean, my personal introduction to it, and indeed probably the only experience I've had of it, was with, it wasn't the Oculus, it might have been the Vive or something like that when I was working at ITPro, and they slapped it on my head so that I could, check it out playing Half-Life, and it was so big that Sasha Muller had to hold it onto my head to stop it just sliding down over my face so that I could actually see. And this is a classic, kind of talking point of mine and a classic of first generation technology, which is, here's some technology that we built for men, because it's not like I have some kind of tiny head. I just have a normal sized woman's head. So that's my first and only experience of VR. I understand that things have come along a little bit more than that. What about you?
So I have been trying VR since the second generation Oculus Rift dev kit, the DK2 as it's commonly known, which was the first kind of modern VR device to really be accessible in an early adopter kind of way. So we've since had multiple different versions of the Oculus Rift, as well as multiple competing VR devices hitting the market. The Vive, as you mentioned, as well as its various spin-offs and other ranges. And it has come on a huge way. You used to have a huge kind of snake of wires connecting the headset to the PC that you were running the headset from, and you used to have a really meaty PC to run it at that. You'd be talking a really high-end gaming machine with a top-end discrete graphics card, a really up-to-the-minute processor, and more RAM than you could shake a stick at. That's not the case anymore. Now we have properly portable headsets, and not just the Samsung Gear VR type headsets that essentially work off of a mobile phone as the main kind of display source and processing power, but actually genuinely self-contained portable headsets. HTC does a number of these kind of more portable headsets, and the Oculus Quest from Facebook is also very much targeting this mobile VR kind of space.
See, I had noticed, when you fire up the Facebook app currently, or, Instagram or any of the Facebook portfolio, there's all the little icons along the bottom, and one of them is the Oculus icon, and I was a bit like, oh, what's that doing there? Not because, obviously I know that Facebook owns Oculus, but I was a bit like, this is still a little bit of a curiosity, isn't it? Why is this here? Which I think speaks to my general out-of-touchness with consumer technology. I mean, it's funny, when you talk about the first generations, it's like some kind of dark sci-fi. It was conjuring up images of Argos from American Gods, the second season. It's a bit freaky and that kind of thing. But I mean, so I've been very up and down when it comes to VR. I was a bit, this is nonsense, and then Microsoft's Hololens came out, and that was, everyone seemed a bit more excited about that. And I was like, oh, maybe, although, there was controversy over the illustrations versus the reality of the headset. But a lot of it seems to have turned out to be either vaporware or not as impressive as had been promised. I mean, I read a write-up once of Magic Leap, And it sounded so impressive, and I was really looking forward to seeing what it would actually do, like basically for years. And then it's become apparent that we're not gonna see it. It's not gonna make it to market, really, I don't think.
No, and this has been a problem with both VR and AR technologies for a long time, a tendency to overpromise and underdeliver, let's say. It's generally the province of people with big ideas and big plans that find that it's actually harder than initially thought to deliver on those ideas and make those ideas a reality.
Yeah.
It's a miracle, frankly, that VR technology has come as far as it has, but it's still a long way off what the kind of early hype was promising.
So yeah, it seems to me that VR really has failed to gain any real traction in the consumer space. I am a long time PlayStation lover, but it just has never crossed my mind to get a PlayStation VR. There's no compelling reason for it, and I live in England, so my living room isn't really big enough to dance around doing stuff without there being a very real danger that I might punch the TV unit.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. A large portion of why VR has still yet to take off, in my opinion, is that space is still a huge issue. Most of the VR headsets build themselves on spatial tracking and spatial awareness so that you can, freely move around a virtual environment by moving your actual human legs. And, you do need a decent sized space to do that in. You need between 2 and 6 feet of clear space. Realistically, if you're going to avoid tripping over cables and bumping into furniture or pets or anything, you essentially need a 6-foot square space in which to use this thing, which is still close enough to whatever computing hardware you're running it on, assuming you are using a wired headset, to connect to.
Well, even if you're not, you still have to be within reasonable distance for whatever wireless technology you're using to work. You can't really crack it on and then go to a room that's on the other side of your house, which has lots of space, for example. And there have been motion capture cameras that work with the PlayStation, with the Xbox for, going back 10 years, more than 10 years, where you can see yourself on the screen and play an interactive game with your friends. And, I've never invested in that, but I have played with it. It's kind of fun. I don't really see a compelling reason to use VR over and above that. And of course, there's the other problem, which is it makes people sick.
Yeah, this is still a big problem. It's getting better, but it is still an issue. Part of the reason behind this is the refresh rates still aren't quite high enough to trick your inner ear, essentially, into believing that the motion that you're seeing is being replicated in the real world. It's quite a tricky kind of physiological problem to wrangle with, and I don't know honestly that there's ever going to be a compelling enough solution to make it go away entirely, physically.
Yeah, I mean, considering that this is part of the effect for why some people can't travel facing backwards. That it makes them travel sick because there's a disconnect between what their eyes are seeing and the way that they know that they're traveling, and that is what can make them ill. But I've been at a event where somebody, a friend of mine, they sat down for a VR thing, and thankfully they were sitting down because they felt quite unwell and quite dizzy afterwards. And I think that there is, perhaps companies have kind of taken note of this, and there's less kind of like virtual roller coasters kind of issues going on, because that was definitely a problem. So away from consumer though, business applications, this seems a bit more interesting. Perhaps there's a bit more of a future here from some of the stuff that I've read and edited. Now, you did a remote meeting in VR, so let's why don't you tell us all about that?
Yeah, so this was using HTC's Vive Sync tool, which is their kind of remote meeting software that is built specifically for businesses. HTC, of course, is headquartered in Taiwan, but has a substantial office in San Francisco. And they found that it was actually quite hard to collaborate over those kinds of distances, particularly when you're separated by a time zone. Video calls are one thing, but there's a certain presence that you don't get over a video call. And they developed this Vive Sync tool to allow them to kind of collaborate and communicate in a more naturalistic way, as silly as it sounds to refer to the act of strapping a couple of pounds of plastic to your head as naturalistic. But it does work surprisingly well. I had an interview with David Sapienza, who was one of the lead developers of Vive Sync in the tool itself, and it was surprisingly engaging. It takes place in this lovely little kind of virtual platform area with a view of the San Francisco Bay in the background, which is of course customizable to your own offices or space or Niagara Falls or whichever kind of environment you would most like to be situated in.
So how does that work then? Can you see each other, or are you avatars? You and I, we haven't seen each other for 6 months. A lot of people are working remotely. If I were to strap this on to have a more kind of like personalized experience when we're recording this podcast, for example, or we're doing a team meeting, and all of us are there. If you were all weird like avatars of yourselves, I think I might find that a little bit freaky, actually.
So it is done via avatars. You can either upload a photo of your face and it will kind of build an avatar automatically, which you can then customize, or you can create one from scratch if you'd rather do that. The avatar creator is surprisingly in depth, so you can get a more or less kind of, I don't want to say lifelike, but a fairly kind of faithful representation of yourself, albeit in a slightly kind of cartoony CG type format.
Does it have gestures and stuff? Because I gesticulate. I'm doing it now. I gesticulate all the time. Or are you just like kind of arms by your sides type thing?
It does actually have gesture support because it uses the headset's controllers to map the movements of your arms to what you're doing in the virtual environment. So you can point and gesticulate, and more than that, some of the more advanced headsets also have eye tracking built in, so the headset can see where you're looking and map that to your avatar. So you can have like actual eye contact, and you can see kind of whether or not people are paying attention and what they're looking at within the environment. So if somebody is in a meeting and they're just kind of goofing around with all of the kind of virtual tools that you're given within that, then you'll be able to see that and gently remind them to actually pay attention to whatever you're talking about in the meeting itself.
You're at the back there. So very, very futuristic. Some more practical applications that are happening now. We've had on the site already features and a couple of news stories and stuff about training and support. And from what I've heard and read, this seems to be an area that is really one of the highlights. It looks like VR is actually taking hold and taking off here. Is that a fair assessment, do you think?
I think it's definitely growing in popularity in this area. Of course, the benefit of using VR for training is that it allows you to put trainees in situations which would be either dangerous or difficult or expensive or impractical to do in a physical environment. So, for example, if you are training warehouse operators on plant machinery like forklifts or cranes or what have you, you can't give every trainee their own crane, but you can give them their own headset and their own virtual crane and, teach them how to use it in that way. You can also put construction workers or maintenance workers in potentially dangerous situations and teach them how to deal with them without having to expose them to genuine risks.
So basically, the first time that you're doing something risky or doing an action in a potentially risky environment isn't you're in that potentially risky environment. You've had a chance to practice in a fairly realistic simulation of that.
Exactly. I mean, it's the same principle pilots use. The first time a pilot is at the controls of a 747, it's not in the air. It's in a simulated environment where if things go a little bit sideways, you don't end up with a plane embedded in a cliff face.
Yeah, not something that you want to hear over the announcement, is it? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your pilot today, Jane McCallion. This is actually my first time flying this kind of plane, so buckle up and hold on tight. Let's hope that we get to our destination okay.
One of the other areas where VR has started to get a bit more traction in the business world is design visualization and prototyping and things like that. For the same reasons as training, it's a lot easier to show someone a digital virtual prototype of something like a car or a building or what have you than it is to, build the thing and then take people in to see it if you can just give them a headset with a virtual recreation of the thing that they can still walk around and interact with. It allows them to get a sense of presence at a much lower cost and time investment.
Now, this was a big part of Microsoft's HoloLens pitch. I remember them working on, well, in my brain, it's a Kawasaki Ninja. It might not be actually that, but a high-performance sports motorbike, anyway, model.
Other superbikes are available.
Yes. But, yeah, that was very much part of their pitch as well. So I think that's kind of I do think that's quite an interesting area where it could be useful, because like you say, it's even though we have easy prototyping stuff, like you could make a small scale model with 3D printing, you can scale up, scale down if you are using VR for design visualization.
It's also very useful for things like being able to see exploded views of things, particularly if you're working in things like engineering or manufacturing or aerospace or things like that. It's very easy to take a virtual version of something, swap out components, explode it to see interior views, all of that kind of stuff, which is actually very, very useful during the design process. It also shouldn't be ignored that it can be actually massively helpful for environmental concerns. If you're designing, large things like a car or what have you, it's a lot easier to ship a headset to a supplier or a partner on the other side of the world and, let them view a digital version of whatever it is you're working on than it is to either ship the actual prototype to them or fly them over to see the prototype in the flesh.
Indeed, or if these kinds of things become ubiquitous, then the only thing that you have to do is send them the data.
Well, you've actually hit on a really important point there, Jane, which I think is one of the key barriers to entry that remains for VR technology, particularly within the workplace. And that is that these devices really aren't ubiquitous yet, and the utility of them is cut down massively by that fact. I mean, VR meetings are great. I think they're very useful. I think, they are a little bit gimmicky, but I think they could have a real, genuine impact beyond that. But they're only useful if you and all of the people you wish to meet with have a VR headset. And you can't just ship a VR headset out to everyone you want to have a meeting with and then get them to send it back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very expensive way of doing things.
And very slow as well.
Yeah. When you could just pick up the phone or go on a Zoom / Teams / Slack / whatever meeting. Others apart from all the ones that I just mentioned are available. So do you think that we might see an explosion with VR in the workplace like we did with computers or smartphones? I remember 2008, 2009, the only person with a smartphone in the business that I worked with was the MD, who had a BlackBerry. Now, everyone has a smartphone. Children in school have smartphones. It's just everywhere. And similarly with computers, okay, we're going back a few more decades, but that was slow. And then, suddenly everyone now has a computer, and most of us couldn't do our work without one. Even if you are front-facing, you're customer-facing, patient-facing, whatever, you will still be using a computer as a regular part of your day-to-day life. Could it do something like that?
Potentially, but it's much less likely, because the advantage that the computer has is that it's a general purpose tool. You can do everything from, web browsing to, sending and receiving emails to creating documents. The list is functionally endless. And even at the very outset of computers, even in the very, very early days, they still had a pretty broad application compared to most kind of technical tools. VR is still quite limited in terms of its applications. It's getting better, but it's still limited to things like visualization, like remote collaboration, all of the things we've talked about today. And while there are a range of applications, it's still nowhere near as multi-purpose as a computer or a smartphone.
Yeah, and it, like you say, it doesn't have that. Even in the very early days of computing, when things were very specific, the whole point was that they could do things faster and better than humans. And if your VR is just kind of going, here, you can look at something but slightly differently, it doesn't really have that oomph to it. So what are we saying here when it comes to the future potential of something that has been consistently part of sci-fi, of like kind of futuristic fiction? Is this actually going to look kind of dated when we look back on it in, say, 10 years' time? It's like, oh, yeah, that didn't quite happen, did it?
So I think it could go either way at this point. The technology is there. It will come down in price as development continues, more competition enters the market, and the hardware that powers it becomes more affordable for more vendors. But the key is, as with pretty much every computing platform under the sun, is third-party application support. It's the thing that sank the BlackBerry. It's the thing that killed Palm. If you don't have a wide range of third-party software and alternative use cases for a device, nobody is going to invest in one, because at the end of the day, people don't want single-use tools anymore. Very few people buy standalone portable music players. Very few people buy standalone, telephony devices. Yeah. People want general purpose computing, and until VR can deliver true general purpose computing, or at the very least more general purpose than it is now, it's not going to crack that mainstream appeal. And the same is absolutely true of businesses, because there's no point investing what is still, let's be honest, quite a considerable sum per unit on enough VR headsets for it to be a useful business investment if they only do like two things within your business. There just isn't any point.
Yeah, I think maybe also there's an element of desirability and aspirationalness to it. BlackBerry, which, was the initial smartphone, started with people who could afford it. It was pricey, but it was an aspirational item. It was a status item. If you think about things like Google Glass, which was one of the first AR things, it looked dorky as hell. Even when, designers, fashion designers got involved. And I think that it's missing that element as well. It's neither fish nor fowl. And it hasn't got, like you say, that killer use case, the answer to the question, why would I want this?
Yeah, I think they do feel very cool to use. It does feel very kind of futuristic and cyberpunk-y to actually use them, but it's a very temporary feeling because it's very hard to get away from the fact that you are basically just strapping a £3 plastic visor to your face. You do look like an absolute chump while wearing any VR or AR headset on the market, and there is just no getting away from that.
Well, on that incredibly dorky note, I think that we will have to leave it there for this week. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to leave us a rating and review.
You can find more information on all the topics we've spoken about in the show notes or on our website, itpro.co.uk.
You can also follow us on social media or sign up to our daily newsletter for more great insights.
Thanks for listening, and see you next week.
Bye.
The ITPro Podcast is brought to you by the Dennis Podcast Network.